The shareholder meeting was growing tense when my husband, the CEO, stood up and said, "Natalie has 30 minutes to clear out her desk." Instead of getting angry, I stood up and said, "Thank you." Moments later, 22 colleagues quietly rose from their seats and walked out with me. Zoe, my husband's lover, rested her hand on her pregnant belly and smirked as she watched me get kicked out of the very company I had co-founded. They had no idea what I would do next until his company collapsed just weeks later. Before I tell you the full story, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching this from. The story continues right now. My name is Natalie Gray, 35 years old, living in Chicago. On a Monday morning in March, I stepped into the large conference room on the 42nd floor, the very place where my husband, Parker, and I had once held our first fundraising pitches. The glass-walled room overlooking the Chicago River was still as beautiful as the day I signed the founding plan for Eagle Investment 8 years ago. I came in as the investment director, co-founder of the company, but I didn't know that day I would walk in under that title and walk out with another, the betrayed. The shareholder meeting began at 9 a.m. Strategic partners sat in neat rows. Everyone received a thick dossier, inside which was one unexpected sheet, a notice of executive personnel change. I turned to look at Parker, my husband, the CEO, once my partner in life and in business, but his eyes avoided mine. Then he stood up, his voice clear through the mic. To protect shareholder interests, and in line with our new strategic direction, the board has decided to relieve Natalie of her duties. Effective today, no prior warning, no private letter, no conversation, just a cold announcement in front of dozens of people I once called colleagues. Parker looked at me, putting on a professional face, and added, "You have 30 minutes to clear your desk." The room fell into dead silence. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, gathered my file, stood up, and said a single word. "Thank you." I walked out of the boardroom with steady steps, even though my heart felt like it was beating against the edge of a blade. I headed toward my office. The door was already open. And there, Zoe Torres, the employee I had recruited into our investment training program 2 years ago, was sitting at my desk, hand on my mouse, opening confidential files that only I had access to. She looked at me and smirked. Not a word of apology, not a single explanation. I said nothing. I quietly opened the third drawer, where I always kept my most important things. I took out a silver USB drive containing the complete Henderson portfolio strategy, market risk analysis sheets, and the AI data I had built with my team over the past 3 years. Next to the USB was an old white ceramic mug, slightly cracked at the rim. On it, in blue letters, it read, "Integrity, that's your power. A gift from my former mentor, now retired." I cupped the mug in my hands as a final reminder of why I started. As I stood up, ready to leave the office, I suddenly froze. A soft sound behind me. It was Alice. She stepped closer, gently removed the nameplate Alice Monroe, senior accountant, from the glass door, then whispered, "If you're not here, there's nothing left for me to stay for." She was someone I'd invited on board from day one, a woman in her 60s, with 3 decades in finance, who had always believed in me. I gave her hand a firm squeeze. No words were needed. I stepped into the hallway, and then, one by one, people stood up. Logan, our data analyst, Priya, the first woman I recruited from our internal program, Marcus, Sarah, and then all 22 members of the team I once led, stood up, left their desks, and silently followed me. No one said a word, but their actions spoke louder than 1,000 declarations. We took the stairs. Every step echoed the years that had just been betrayed. The parking lot beneath the building was just as cold as ever. But today, it received 23 people, stripped of titles, stripped of status, but still carrying worth. A worth no one could take away. I looked around. No one rushed to their cars, as if all were waiting for an answer. I didn't promise a new startup. I didn't say I'd get revenge. I simply said, if any of you still believe we can do better, for our clients, for ourselves, then wait for my call. They nodded. I got into my car, shut the door, and smiled as I drove away from Eagle Investment. That night, I didn't return to the house my husband and I shared. I couldn't. I didn't want to. Instead, I went back to the small apartment on West Roscoe Street, the one my parents gave me when I started my freshman year at DePaul, a two-bedroom place with a tiny balcony facing Lake Michigan, where I once pulled all-nighters, wrote my thesis, and drafted the first lines of a business plan at 22. After getting married, I kept the place as a storage of memories. And today, I returned, not to reminisce, but to begin again. I sat on the old caramel brown sofa, still holding the Integrity mug I brought back from the office. The white ceramic cup had a small crack, but the lettering remained clear. Integrity, that's your power. I placed it on the table next to an old college photo frame I had never taken down. My phone buzzed. A message from Ava, daughter of my late best friend, now an MBA student at Kellogg. The first message was a shaky question. Ms. Natalie, I saw on LinkedIn. Is it true you were fired? Then another message followed, longer, deeper, like a press on a wound I didn't think still hurt. Do you still believe kind women can survive in the investment world? I set the phone down. Then I stood up, opened the balcony door, and stepped outside. The night wind from the lake stung my face with its chill, but I didn't flinch. I stood there, quietly, looking at the city that had watched me grow, that had seen me believe in collaboration, in professional ethics, in love. I closed my eyes, letting the wind strip away every excess emotion. I didn't want to think about Parker, didn't want to recall Zoe's face at my desk. I only thought about Ava's question. I returned to the living room, opened my laptop, backed up personal data, revoked remote access to the files I had created. When the computer shut down, I looked at the mug, still there, unmoved. I took a photo of it, sent it to Ava, and replied, I still believe. And tomorrow, I'll begin to prove it. I no longer needed recognition. I only needed to be true to myself. And I knew, tomorrow, that journey would truly begin. The next morning, I stepped into the kitchen, poured more coffee, and reopened the old message thread between Parker and me. Something had been gnawing at me ever since he stood up and announced my termination. Not the career loss, but the coldness of someone who once knew me intimately, who once stayed up all night writing the Henderson Fund proposal with me, who once watched me speak to the strategy board like I was irreplaceable. And yet yesterday, he hadn't blinked when he said, You have 30 minutes to clear your desk. I opened my phone, scrolled through the old Google Calendar meetings. Parker had changed his password last week, claiming IT required it. He'd also stopped coming home regularly since last month, citing investor meetings in Lake Geneva. When I asked if I should join, he simply shook his head. You don't need to worry about this. The way he said you was light as air, but cold as February wind off the lake. Then there was a small detail, but it wouldn't leave my mind. Last week, I saw Zoe wearing a pair of pearl earrings, the exact design of the custom piece I had commissioned for Parker to give me on our 5th anniversary, a gift I never received. When I asked him what he had planned to give me that year, he gave a dismissive smile. Guess I must have forgotten. I exhaled deeply, then opened my contacts. I tapped a familiar name, Eleanor Reyes. Eleanor wasn't just any lawyer. We met in sophomore year. I majored in finance, she in law, but we both enrolled in a startup course. Back then, we were two mismatched puzzle pieces, one obsessed with numbers, one with justice. But we both believed in fair business. From our first class presentation, we were closer than sisters, sharing joys, sleepless nights, and unnamed ambitions. Over a decade later, when I needed someone who understood both the industry and my heart, she was the first call I made. She picked up after 2 rings. Hey, girl. Her voice was as always, deep, steady, and never rushed. I said it outright. I was fired by my husband. In front of the board, silence. Then Eleanor replied, "I'm free this afternoon. My office is open all day. But if you don't want to go out, I can come to you." I looked around my old apartment, the place I had been myself, before the glass offices, before the polished intros. No, I want to go out. I need to do this with a clear head. Eleanor's office sat in a quiet red brick building in West Loop. She opened early, brewed 2 mugs of peppermint tea herself. Behind her desk hung a metal plaque that simply read, "Protect what she built." We sat at a small meeting table, far from any noise. I told her everything: the firing, Zoe at my desk, the accessed data, Parker's eyes, the earrings. Eleanor took notes, never interrupting. But I knew she was already calculating. When I finished, she asked just one question. "Do you still want to save this marriage?" I paused, then slowly answered, "I don't know. But I can't live beside someone who can sever everything in a room full of people and still sleep peacefully that night." Eleanor nodded. "Then we don't need to file yet. But we prepare. First, an assessment of assets and company rights. Then, potential data breaches and co-founder entitlements. And if we uncover personal evidence, like infidelity, financial manipulation, we'll use it." I pulled the silver USB from my bag and placed it on the table. "This holds all portfolio data I've managed over 8 years. And the backup files Zoe can't copy, because she doesn't have the algorithm I built." Eleanor smirked. "Perfect. Time to play this chess game with strategy, not emotion." I looked out the window. Chicago's sky still gray like every March morning. But for the first time, I didn't feel alone in the storm. I didn't know if Parker realized what was coming. But I did. And this time, I wasn't entering the battlefield with hope. I was bringing legal documents and a friend holding the sword. 3 days after meeting Eleanor, I got a message from her at 6 a.m. "Are you free this noon? I have something to show you." "It's shocking," I replied with one word. "There." We met at a small cafe tucked into an alley in West Loop, the kind that serves fresh ginger tea Eleanor likes. I had barely sat down when she placed a thick envelope and a USB in front of me. I asked a friend, Lily Weston, a private investigator, to dig into Zoe, just for extra protection. But the findings went far beyond expectations. I opened the envelope. Inside were printed photos, GPS data, hotel charge records, and message transcripts. "Zoe is pregnant," Eleanor said slowly. I looked up. My heart skipped a beat. She told Parker it's his. He believes her. And he's been wiring cash to her private account every month. I leaned back, my throat dry. But Eleanor wasn't done. According to Zoe's phone GPS data and security check-ins from Aurora residences, she's been regularly staying at the apartment of a man named Gabriel Hall. I blinked. That name, familiar. Gabriel? You mean her ex? The one she broke up with just a year ago? Used to work at Aspen Private Equity? Eleanor nodded. They're still in contact. And according to Lily, Parker has no idea. Also, she pulled out another printout. One of Lily's associates, a cybersecurity expert, accessed Zoe's Samsung phone backups. We found a message exchange we believe is critical. She slid the paper to me. The words were clear. Gabriel. You sure he believes the baby's his? Zoe. He does. He's even picking out names, Gabriel. So what now? When it's born, what'll you say? Zoe. Depends. But if I get promoted, let him believe it. I don't know how long I was silent. I only remember that even the soft clink of someone stirring tea at the next table startled me. Eleanor placed her hand on the table, not touching mine. She knew I didn't need comforting. I needed space to assess, like a venture portfolio facing a liquidity crisis. I looked at her, my voice rough. Parker doesn't know any of this? No, but you do. And now, you control this entire game. I nodded without a word. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. The anger inside me didn't flare up like fire. It froze, slow and steady, like ice beneath the earth. I realized Zoe hadn't just betrayed me. She had betrayed the very man she was manipulating. And Parker? He hadn't just betrayed me professionally. He was blindly giving his trust and money to a lie so calculated it was almost pitiful. I left the cafe near noon. Chicago was warmer than usual that day. On the way home, I thought of only one thing. I didn't need revenge. I needed the truth to finally be heard. That night, I barely slept. Not out of anger, not from pain, but because my mind spun like a market in crisis. Data flowing nonstop, timelines linking themselves, until one final question flashed like the bottom line of a spreadsheet. How do I handle this without becoming like them? The next morning, I received an email from an unnamed sender with a single subject line. Coffee meeting. Bring nothing. I've brought it. The sender. Margaret Lawson. Margaret used to be the general counsel at Eagle Investment, a sharp woman, always dressed plainly, salt and pepper hair in a tight bun, her gaze colder than a January lake. She had left the company a year ago, without ever explaining why. But I'd always suspected. Margaret had once been the only person in a boardroom to stare Parker down when he interrupted me during a strategic negotiation. She said nothing at the time, just pushed a fountain pen toward me and said, "You're the one who needs to sign first." We met at a French cafe south of Grant Park, a place no one from Eagle Investment ever went. I arrived first, ordered oolong tea. Margaret came in with no handbag, only a worn black folder that looked like it belonged to a pre-digital era. She sat down and got straight to the point. "I heard what happened to you. And if you're working with Eleanor, then I know now's the time to speak up." I nodded slightly. I didn't ask how she knew. Margaret always knew everything before it happened. She opened her folder and handed me a thick stack of papers. These are copies of emails Parker sent to the board regarding team restructuring. But in truth, it's a list of people he planned to eliminate, including 3 who had opposed Zoe's promotion. I have the originals, with server timestamps, captured before the IT team updated the system. I flipped through the first page. My name was at the top. Below it, a note. Replace with someone who can be controlled and shaped to personal strategy. Suggested Z. T. Margaret poured some water, her voice low but firm. I objected from the start. But Parker sidestepped it by forming a temporary internal review committee and planting his own people. I resigned after seeing the company's ethical structure collapse. I looked at her, wanting to ask why she was helping me. But before I could speak, she answered, "Because I once thought Eagle Investment would be my final legal legacy." But I was wrong. You're the one who can restore justice, not through accusations, but by surviving, enduring, and winning with your values intact. I stayed silent. She slid the folder toward me, then stood up. "I'm not picking sides. But if you build something new, a place where integrity isn't mistaken for weakness, save me a seat." One last time I stood to shake her hand. In my grasp wasn't just legal documentation, but evidence of a rotten system, and the affirmation that I hadn't been the only one seeing it all along. As I left the cafe, light rain began to fall. Chicago was damp and cold, but my hands had never felt warmer. That afternoon, I returned to my old apartment earlier than usual. The same thin golden sunlight of late March in Chicago streamed in, but everything around me felt different, not because the world had changed, but because I was beginning to see more clearly. To see what had once been blurred by blind faith, misplaced admiration, and a habit of sacrificing so much I forgot myself. I placed the folder Margaret had given me on the table. Right next to it was a small wooden box, something I had brought back from my parents' house after my mother passed away 3 years ago, but had never opened. My mother had been an elementary school teacher, gentle but fiercely principled. She knew nothing about investments, didn't care about IPOS or asset portfolios, but she knew how to instill a different kind of value, one that didn't show up on charts and didn't need a balance sheet to be proven. I took the box, wiped off the thin layer of dust on the lid, and opened it. Inside was a photo of me and my mother at graduation. Me in a black cap, her in a moss green coat, holding me under a tree full of leaves, and an aged envelope with handwriting I knew by heart. To Natalie, open when the world feels unfair. I opened the letter. My eyes stopped at the very first line. My daughter, if you are reading this letter, you may be going through a time when kindness is seen as foolishness, loyalty is trampled on, and success is taken by those who don't deserve it. I took a deep breath. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but because it felt like she was right there in front of me, just as she had been every time I failed in high school, placing her hand gently on my back and saying, "It's not your fault if the world chooses to turn its back on what's right, but don't ever let it make you turn your back on yourself." The letter went on. You may lose your job, lose people you trusted, lose everything you worked hard to build, but if you still keep your integrity, then you've lost nothing at all. I didn't teach you how to be a CEO, but I hoped you'd know how to be a woman who lets no one decide her worth. I set the letter down. I didn't cry, but something lodged in my throat, not tears, but a kind of beautiful pain, like stepping out of darkness and remembering that the light had always come from within. I stood up, collected myself. On the wall, the integrity mug still sat in its usual place. Below it, the USB holding every file I ever created. Next to it, the folder Eleanor was finalizing. And now, the letter from my mother. I was no longer just a woman who had lost a job and a crumbling marriage. I was someone who had inherited something far greater than a title, a legacy of spirit. And this time, I wasn't fighting to reclaim a title. I was fighting to reclaim myself. That evening, I opened the window, letting the March wind sweep into the old apartment where I had once lived through my college years. On the table sat my mother's letter, Eleanor's legal documents in progress, and the USB holding the entirety of the projects I had led. Then, the landline phone, an old relic I had kept out of habit, began to ring. I hesitated a few seconds, then picked up. On the other end was a deep, steady, slightly husky woman's voice, shaped by decades in the business world. "Natalie? This is Gloria Monroe." My heart clenched. I remembered her voice. Gloria had been one of the first clients I ever brought in when I co-founded the firm, a private investor in her 60s, who once owned a chain of luxury retirement homes in Illinois before selling everything to retire. She was the one who had told me, "You're not just managing my money, you're protecting the years I have left." I responded with as much composure as I could muster. "Hello, Ms. Gloria. I've left Eagle Investment." But she cut me off. I didn't call to hear apologies. I called to act. I froze. "I've been watching things. They wiped your name off the company. But I also know who built those portfolios, who got me through the 2020 crash, who stayed up until 2 a.m., updating my charts when I was worried about my husband's health." I bit my lip. Gloria wasn't the emotional type. But today, her voice trembled, "I've just submitted a full withdrawal request for my portfolio at Eagle Investment. That amount is $11.6 million, and I want to reinvest it, but not through them. Through you, if you start something new." I could barely speak. I whispered, "Are you sure?" More sure than ever. Because I invest in people, not logos. I set the receiver down, hands still trembling. Not because of the number, but because of what it meant to be seen. After everything, someone still saw me, not as a disgraced co-founder, but as a woman who had proven her worth through action, through ethics, and through not selling herself short for a title. Gloria's call wasn't just an investment offer. It was a reminder I wasn't alone, and the time to rise was now. I turned back to the table, opened my laptop, created a new file, named it Phoenix Investment Fund, The Flame from the Ashes. I named it Phoenix Investment Fund, not because I thought I was a phoenix, but because I had hit bottom, and if I didn't rise on my own, no one else would do it for me. I had no office, No CEO title, not even a logo. What I did have was the data in my mind, real relationships, and a list of 22 people who once walked out with me, people who had stood up the moment I was fired, ready to follow me if I chose to start again. And I chose to start again. The first person I called was Eleanor. She arrived at my apartment the next morning with an iced latte and a thick folder. She didn't say much, just set the cup down and said, "I've drafted the company charter, ownership structure, and all filings needed for the state of Illinois. Phoenix Investment Fund will be a fully owner-controlled LLC. No one's flipping the table on you again." I looked at her, speechless. For years, we had shared every high and low, from failing corporate finance to staying up all night filing our first startup application at 21. I used to think college friendships faded with time. But Eleanor was still here, laying the first brick when all I had was rubble. That entire day, we rebuilt email systems, domain names, business registrations. I video called every member of the old team, analysts, portfolio managers, communication staff. No one asked about salaries. They only asked, "When do you start again? Do you need me now?" I used to fear I couldn't rally anyone. But it turns out, trust isn't a luxury. All it takes is one person to rise, and others will come to the light like moths to flame. That evening, I texted Gloria. "Phoenix Investment Fund is now officially registered. The trust account will be opened at the bank you requested, and I promise that money will never be betrayed again." I closed my laptop and leaned back in the chair. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not out of revenge against Parker, not to prove anything. I smiled because I was doing what I do best, in the way I believe is right. Phoenix isn't vengeance. Phoenix is a declaration. I won't just survive. I'll live right. 3 weeks after founding Phoenix Investment Fund, Eleanor and I walked into the Midwest Investment Conference at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, a venue that had long been Parker's stomping ground. The navy blazer I wore was a gift from Eleanor last year, with a hand-stitched phrase hidden beneath the collar. Earned, not given. I smoothed my hair, adjusted the name tag pinned to my chest. Natalie Gray, CEO, Phoenix Investment Fund. The ballroom was bright, glimmering with designer suits, and the soft clinking of glass over thick carpets. I looked around. The Stratworth Capital booth sat at the center. Parker stood chatting with 3 investors from New York, his expression calm, confident, unshakable, until his eyes landed on Eleanor and me entering the room. That moment, I'll never forget. Parker's face froze. His lips moved, trying to say something, then he quickly turned away as if my presence were a ghost he couldn't banish. I smiled, not to provoke, but to affirm, I didn't disappear. I just came back to reclaim what should have never been taken. The organizers directed me to a small table on the left side of the ballroom, where emerging funds showcased their models. No one knew that, just 3 years ago, I helped write the evaluation criteria for this very conference. But I didn't care. I laid out my laptop, documents detailing the Phoenix Impact Fund, an investment platform for women-founded companies, committed to ESG transparency and social accountability. The only thing I brought with me was clarity. Eleanor stood beside me, silent, but her presence, one of the most respected investment lawyers in Illinois, was answer enough for every skeptical glance. When it was my turn to present, I stepped onto a small stage. My voice didn't shake, though my hand gripping the mic was cold from nerves. I looked directly at the front row, where Parker sat beside Zoe, the pregnant woman he once believed to be his strategic sympathy card for investor goodwill. I began. We didn't build Phoenix out of revenge. We built it because there are thousands of women who never get to pitch their projects, just because they lack the network, the husband in a boardroom, the patron behind the scenes. Phoenix doesn't invest in relationships. Phoenix invests in truth. When I finished, the room fell into a strange silence. Then came a few claps. Then more. Then the entire room stood. I saw Gloria, my first angel investor, standing in the crowd, eyes glistening. As the applause died down, I returned to the Phoenix table. Ava handed me a glass of water, her hands trembling with emotion. I hadn't even sat down when a woman in her early 60s, silver hair neatly pinned, wearing a cream suit, elegant in its simplicity, approached. She extended her hand, her voice calm and rich. "I'm Deborah Kane. I once invested in Eagle Investment, back when you were there, and I pulled my funds the day I heard you were fired." She paused, smiled, and placed a business card on the table. "I've been waiting for a moment like this." Less than 10 minutes later, Phoenix modest client seating, initially set with just 6 chairs, was unexpectedly overwhelmed. Staff scrambled to add folding tables, extra pens, and presentation folders. Within the hour, 12 senior investors, many of them former Eagle clients or longtime watchers of my work, committed a total of $2.5 million to Phoenix. Some brought daughters or granddaughters, saying, "I'm investing not just for returns, but so these girls have a better future." I looked around and realized most of them didn't need more spreadsheets or slides. They had seen what mattered most: integrity. And that was something I had spent years hiding beneath polished decks, rehearsed pitches, and backroom handshakes. At that moment, Parker remained seated in the front row, his shoulders tightening as each person walked past, stopping instead at my table. Zoe's eyes were unfocused, her hands clutching her belly like she could feel the first winter wind chilling the already cold air around them. Phoenix wasn't a success yet, but that day it was validated, not by a merger, but by trust. And trust has no price tag. The next morning, the front page of the Chicago Tribune ran a bold headline in red: $150 million mistake by new CEO. News of the disastrous investment in Asterix Global Equity, directly overseen by Zoe, had broken wide open. The fund had been under SEC scrutiny since early in the year for high-risk trades in emerging markets. On Monday morning, Eagle Investment stock plummeted, down more than 18% overnight, wiping out over $150 million in market value. The board demanded an internal investigation. And for the first time, Zoe's name appeared in the financial press as an inexperienced, emotional CEO creating systemic risk. I said nothing. I sat in Phoenix's small office, overlooking the foggy Chicago River, as Eleanor gave me the update. "Zoe's in the hospital. Total breakdown. Acute stress." I nodded, calm, as if I'd foreseen it. But then Eleanor added, "And Gabriel, he's there." I looked at her, eyes narrowing. "He went to the hospital?" Eleanor nodded. "Twice in 48 hours, according to the nurses." I knew the moment had come. That afternoon, outside Northwestern Memorial Hospital, media had already gathered. Internal leaks about the Asterix disaster had sparked investor outrage. Parker had yet to appear. Eleanor and I arrived quietly, speaking to no press. She carried a thick envelope. Inside, the DNA test she had ordered weeks ago, taken from a half-finished Starbucks cup Zoe left in a previous meeting, and a hair sample from Parker during the May board session. All legal, all prepared. At 4:27 p.m., Parker emerged from a gray SUV, flanked by 2 PR aides. He didn't know I was standing across the street, beneath a row of maples shedding their fall colors. But when Gabriel showed up, shirt wrinkled, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, Zoe lost control. In a video that went viral afterward, she screamed, "You shouldn't be here! You'll destroy me!" And then she broke down. No graceful tears, but guttural sobs, as if every mask had melted in the soaked winds of October. While the crowd stood frozen, Eleanor stepped forward. She faced the press, held up the DNA results, and declared, "I'm Eleanor Blake, legal counsel for Phoenix Investment Fund stakeholders, and this is the DNA result confirming the biological father of the child Zoe claimed belonged to Mr. Parker Marshall. The result shows 0 genetic relation." The father is Gabriel J. Harris. Gabriel's name echoed under the flash of cameras. Parker turned to Eleanor, and for the first time, I saw his lips sealed. No denial, no spin, and from the crowd, only dead silence. I stepped out from beneath the trees. Each step fell on cold stone, but in my chest burned fire. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to perform. All I needed was timing and the truth. Because when truth is clear enough, it is the sharpest sword. And today, Parker was cut by the very blade he tried to bury. 3 days after the hospital DNA shock, I sat at my usual cafe on Clark Street when a message from an unknown number appeared. Natalie, I'm standing outside your office. I'm asking for 5 minutes. I looked out the window. Parker, wearing a wrinkled gray suit, no tie, face drawn. He no longer resembled the confident CEO on stage, but a man who had lost everything: reputation, power, and the truth. I stood, opened the door. He didn't speak right away, just quietly placed a thick envelope in front of me. A draft contract. If I agreed to return to Eagle as honorary advisor, he'd transfer $1 million, along with an NDA to prevent me from disclosing company details and the Zoe incident. I didn't touch the envelope. My fingers rested lightly on a lukewarm cappuccino. Do you really think I need the money that badly? I asked, my voice soft like the morning wind in early November. He looked down, then said what he thought I wanted to hear. I'm sorry. I don't know how things got this far. Maybe we could start over. I nodded. We'll start over, but not together. Then I pulled out a cream-colored folder. Divorce papers, with copies of the DNA results, Zoe Gabriel transfer records, and leaked internal audio from the Asterix deal. I hadn't come to negotiate. I had come to end it. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the feeling of coming home to myself. Weeks later, in the bright space of Phoenix Investment Fund's office, the company I built with the 22 former colleagues who walked out with me, I welcomed Ava, our first intern. She was 22, curly-haired, bright-eyed, and hesitated when I extended my hand. I didn't think you'd be the one interviewing me, she said, a bit embarrassed. I smiled. I'm the last person you need to impress. The rest, let your work speak. Ava was Eleanor's goddaughter, the woman who had stood beside me like a sister. I wanted this new generation of the company to begin the right way, through inspiration, not conditions. I was no longer the ousted COO. I was the one who rebuilt the foundation from rubble, with integrity, intelligence, and nothing left to hide. The courtroom was gray with a December chill, but I walked in like someone who had already seen the light at the end of the tunnel. Eleanor, wearing a crisp navy suit, eyes sharp as a scalpel, stood beside me. No longer the college friend who once sat with me in sophomore innovative startups, but now my legal representative. The only woman I trusted to help reclaim justice, not just for a betrayed marriage, but for a part of my life I had once wagered everything on. Before the Cook County judge, Eleanor presented the full financial evidence. From the equity I had contributed when co-founding Eagle Investment, to the detailed breakdown of Parker's extravagant spending on Zoe using company funds. She pointed at each line: first-class flights, Birkin bags, a luxury apartment for his personal assistant, all drawn from the marketing budget. I sat silently, watching. When it was Parker's turn, his lawyer fumbled through a compensation proposal, offering less than half the shared asset value. But Eleanor calmly replied, "My client doesn't ask for more. She asks for what's fair." After nearly 3 hours of arguments, the court ruled I would receive a $2.2 million cash settlement and retain full intellectual property rights to the digital investment platform I built for Eagle Investment. Divorce granted. Final. No entanglements. 2 weeks later, the headlines broke across financial media. Parker Jennings resigns as CEO after internal scandal, read CNBC's succinct headline. Meanwhile, Eagle Investment, reeling from the Asterix stock crash, was officially acquired by longtime rival Halberg Investment Group. The old photos of Parker and me, once displayed at investment summits, were now replaced by a picture of me shaking hands with Halberg's chairman at a new conference. Reporters asked if I felt like I had won. I shook my head. I didn't win. I just chose to stop losing. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet nod of someone who's stayed silent for far too long. 3 months after the divorce ruling, the name Eagle Investment no longer appeared on digital boards at investment halls. The former headquarters, where Parker and I had once pulled all-nighters coding the first version of our investment platform, now bore a sign, Under Management by Halberg. As for Zoe, the once proud strategic specialist who strode into offices with a Hermes bag in hand, she was dismissed in an emergency meeting devoid of tears. Halberg's audit committee uncovered glaring holes in her approval of the Asterix Global Equity Investment, a deal that had bypassed every risk analysis layer, resulting in over $150 million in losses and wiping out 90% of 200 clients' portfolios. The internal report called it reckless conduct of a personalized nature. She attempted to write an apology email, but no one replied. Those who had once flattered her at networking events now avoided her like a stain no one wanted to touch. And Parker? He rented a tiny office on the 3rd floor of an unnamed building in Naperville, branding himself as an independent financial consultant. But no clients came. His LinkedIn profile showed just 2 interactions, one from his mother and the other from Zoe. One early spring evening, scrolling through news, I saw a photo of the two of them at a local investment fair, listed as honorary guests. But no one introduced them, no one asked them anything. They sat in the last row, holding hands. And in that fleeting moment, I felt no bitterness. I simply smiled and said to Ava, the intern now sitting across from me in Phoenix's modest office, "They chose each other." And they fell together. 6 months after the court ruling, I stood in front of the new glass building at 233 South Wacker Drive, in the heart of Chicago's Loop. The sign, Phoenix Investment Fund, had just been installed that morning, glinting in the soft light like a new symbol of rebirth. Not just mine, but for every woman once overlooked. We started with 22. Now we were 45. The office had no dark corners, only meeting rooms bathed in natural light, hallways lined with paintings by Ava, each a symbol of overcoming hardship. Ava, the same girl who once emailed me asking for an internship, was now a strategic analyst. I assigned her a new portfolio, letting her devise the strategy and present it to clients. She performed better than any veteran I'd ever worked with. Phoenix's assets under management had surpassed $105 million, more than 5 times our original goal. One of our most cherished investors was Gloria Spencer, a woman who raised 3 children alone after her husband left. At our year-end client forum, she stood up and said, "I didn't invest in Phoenix just for returns. I did it so my granddaughters could see a firm led by women, where values aren't sacrificed for prestige." I stood frozen, not from momentary emotion, but because I realized that what I was building wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring value. On the top floor, I had a private boardroom built with a small portrait, not of me, but of my mother. Below it, etched in steel, Elaine Harper Fund, because dignity is legacy. The fund, named after her, was created to support under 30 female-led startups from disadvantaged backgrounds with resilient drive. I handed the fund's management to Ava, bringing the circle full. My mother always believed in rebirth from pain. And now, I live each day like a new flame, not to burn the past, but to light the path for those trying to escape it. On the final morning of December, snow drifted softly across the wide glass panes of Phoenix office, casting a quiet shimmer like fragments of memory closing themselves. In the largest meeting room, all 45 team members were present. Some wore blazers, others simple sweaters, but in every pair of eyes shone the same light: recovery. I stood before them, beside Ava and Eleanor, now Phoenix legal director, and smiled. My voice was low, steady, but unwavering. Those 30 minutes of being fired weren't the end, I said. They were the beginning of a generation of women no longer willing to be led by the nose. We didn't rebuild from ashes just to look back. We built to move forward, with lessons we carved ourselves. There was applause. But no one cheered. People just looked at one another and nodded. A quiet kind of respect, as if each of them carried a Natalie inside. A part that had once been dismissed, doubted, cut off mid-dream. After the meeting, I received an email from Bloomberg with the subject, "Phoenix Beyond the Ashes?" They requested a full interview for their New Year's special. I replied with a single sentence, then closed my laptop. We didn't build this to retaliate. We built so no one would be forgotten. That night, returning to my new apartment, where a small wooden plaque hung etched with the words, "Still I Rise," I found an envelope in the mailbox. No sender address, but I recognized the handwriting, my mother's. The letter was short, just a few lines. "Natalie, I know you're stronger than I ever imagined, and you never have to choose between love and self-respect. Because you deserve both, I placed the letter beside the white ceramic integrity mug, the gift from my late mentor. Then opened the window, letting the year's final breeze sweep through. Far off, Chicago's skyline sparkled in the night, proof that from pain, we don't just survive. We can rise. Like, subscribe if you believe women of all ages deserve respect. Share this video with a woman who once sacrificed in silence. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because no matter what stage of life we're in, we can begin again, with our heads held high.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.